Often leadership is described in a way that creates an image of narrow, coercive manipulation of others. But in our conversation today, we're going to expand that concept of leadership to encompass an exploration of the connection between leadership and the ancient Greek concept of polis, or a partnership for living well. When I think about the future of leadership, I want to point out that for you to stand out, for you to innovate and to make your way to the top, position yourself and your business powerfully, you really need to master these things that we're talking about today. Navigating innovation in leadership styles. The future of leadership and innovating your way to the top is the topic that we're going to be covering today. And this topic taps into a whole bunch of things that I have had a lifelong fascination with. My undergraduate and postgraduate studies focused on leadership, and my master's thesis was on charismatic leadership in the modern age, which included an examination of different leadership theories and a whole bunch of really fascinating things, which I'm going to weave in today to the episode. The other two areas that really have influenced and shaped my thinking around leadership and business are that I have had the privilege of having some incredible mentors over the last few decades, and also then have been able to tap into my own life experience from my leadership journey and that of the hundreds and hundreds of different leaders, particularly business leaders, that I've worked with around the world. And so all of those things are going to have some influence in what we cover today and how we look at this topic of navigating innovation in leadership styles. So one of the first things I just want to do is I'm going to share some of the elements that were back in my master's thesis. So 20 years ago, but still relevant when it comes to these ideas around leadership styles and theory. And then I'm particularly going to take that through how things have changed in the last decade or so. James McGregor Burns said that leadership is one of the most observed and least understood phenomena on Earth. Often leadership is described in a way that creates an image of narrow, coercive manipulation of others. But in our conversation today, we're going to expand that concept of leadership to encompass an exploration of the connection between leadership and the ancient Greek concept of polis, or a partnership for living well. This view of leadership as involving wisdom, service, and the good of the many creates a counterpoint to that narrow, restrictive view of leadership. In order to fully develop this and think through what that means for us in our explorations today, we need to move beyond those overly clinical views of leadership that are often presented in the discourse to include not only the intellectual and rational, but also the emotional and even spiritual aspects of leadership. The most common perception, or the everyman category of leadership, would be the great man theory. This theory centres on hero worship and the core belief that there are only a few very rare individuals in any society at any time with the unique characteristics to shape or express history. This type of thinking is synonymous with the notion that leaders are born and not made. One of the theorists that I looked at in my postgrad studies was named Handy. And Handy puts this in a slightly different way when he says that leadership skills may not be able to be taught, but they can be learnt, or rather discovered, fostered, and allowed to grow. So this puts more of an emphasis on the role of experience rather than a black and white existence or lack of leadership skill. The everyman perception plays an important role whether the focus is on the leader, the follower, or the relationship between the two. The people's perception of the leader plays a crucial role in the success or failure of that leader. That's a little bit of background that I'm pulling out of my thesis. But in relation to the future of leadership and innovating your way to the top, the element that I want you to think about is that a reflection on leadership and business as being rooted in that concept I shared of polis, the ancient Greek concept. Polis meaning a partnership for living well. That, being at the heart of your reflections, is going to be really powerful. And I always say that in my work, those two things of leadership and business are the two driving passions. And I constantly think of both of those connected to this idea of polis, the creation, if you like, of what we're trying to create when we lead, what we're trying to create when we build a business, is a partnership for living well. You've probably heard me talking about creating a win-win business model. It's the same idea. This idea of both business and leadership being rooted in polis, the partnership for living well, leads really naturally into one of the frameworks that I've created called the Thrive Cycle. And there's 3 elements to the Thrive Cycle. The first piece that you need to have in place to build a thriving business, even in an uncertain market, is what I talk about as know the value you bring. So we think of this from a business model perspective in the back end or behind the curtain, backstage of your business model. And whether we're looking at this from the leadership perspective or the business perspective, with the Thrive Cycle, the know the value you bring is a critical starting place to be able to build out this partnership for living well. The second element of the Thrive Cycle is understand the value stakeholders want. Now, that word stakeholders can mean a whole bunch of different things depending on your business. For you, the stakeholders might be your customers, they might be your team, your suppliers, your investors, the community you operate in. There can be a whole bunch of different stakeholders that are really critical to ensuring that you can build a thriving business. But that second step of the Thrive Cycle is understanding the value that those stakeholders want. The third element is called capture, and it's where we capture value in return. So the 3 pieces of that cycle can be a really simple framework for you to work through when you think about your own leadership and developing your business, not only to have that end game of a thriving business, but to use those today as a practical stepped process to create that idea of polis, the partnership for living well, to bring a certain depth to your leadership and to the business itself that you are running and building. So as we wrap up this first piece, the elements of the evolution of leadership styles over this past decade, really the centrality and the piece that I want you to have front and center in your mind as we move into looking at some of the shifts in the last decade in particular, is I want you to keep right up there at the front of your mind the idea of polis, a partnership for living well, that's the end game for your leadership and your business, and the simple framework of the Thrive Cycle. Know the value you bring, understand the value stakeholders want, capture value in return. Leadership styles have shifted and evolved a lot in the business space over the last decade. Social, economic, and technological changes have shaped those shifts. And I want to talk you through a little bit more of the leadership theory component to start off with, but then map out for you 3 of the big shifts that I see that have occurred around leadership styles in the last decade, and try to help you highlight and identify how your reflections on these things and you making some really intentional choices can help you get ahead and position yourself and your business more effectively. The first element, tying us back again to leadership theory, that I want to bring out is an idea around contingency theory. Now, this is one of the theories that I studied back in the day at university. And contingency theory attempts to predict the most appropriate or effective leadership style to fit within particular circumstances or situations. The essence of contingency theory is that effective leadership is contingent or dependent on one or more of the factors of behavior, personality, influence, and situation. We're going to pull that apart a little bit, and throughout the conversation today, you'll see particularly the elements around the understanding of your preferences and styles, but looking at starting to be more discerning in our ability to read the room and be conscious of that situational element in contingency theory. The last academic piece in today's conversation is to just share with you one of the breakdowns of different leadership styles that might be helpful to kind of have in your mind as you do your own reflections on your leadership style. So this comes from Sadler, who claimed that leadership styles can be plotted along a continuum consisting of 4 categories: the autocratic, the persuasive, the consultative, and the democratic. Despite the fact that different styles of leadership are needed to produce effective leadership in different situations, research suggests that individual leaders tend to employ one of the styles more consistently than the others, thus giving their overall pattern of leadership behaviour a flavour, which makes it possible to describe it as characteristically autocratic, persuasive, consultative, or democratic. The connecting theme here that we want to pick up is this idea that the situation dictates the appropriate style. Now, as you try to seek to understand your natural preferences or leadership style, this is a really important part of your role. And so often we're not reflective and we're busy doing all the things, being the achiever and very driven, but not stopping to do this work to reflect and understand ourselves better. When we pair some of these ideas with a solid understanding of our organisation, our team, the market that we work in, our customers, and all of those types of elements that sat in the category before that I spoke to you about in the Thrive cycle of your stakeholders, understanding the value that your stakeholders want. When you combine these two things, then what happens is it allows you to de-risk and mitigate risk in your business in a really effective way, because you can do things like bring in skills or certain styles that you lack, and you also start to tune in much quicker to knowing when you need to get out of the way. So this piece of leadership styles, of understanding your natural flavour or the tendency, the preferences of how you think and operate as a leader, is really important. It's not just let's fill in a little assessment and get categorised or, put ourselves in a box. I'm not trying to get you to think about any of the tools that you might want to use in that way. The reflection of it is far more pragmatic, and it's about you starting to be able to have tools and practical ways in to step through that Thrive cycle, right? So know the value you bring for you as an individual leader and then for your business itself. This component of your leadership style is going to be one of the factors required there. I'm going to share a link in the show notes to a story, a short video that I've recorded, where I share an example of a leader who did not learn how to be discerning and know when to get out of their own way and when they were actually undermining their own legacy, and how that kind of played out for them. So if you want to hear a little story, jump to the show notes and you can head over to that video. It is called What I Learned About Leadership from Sitting in a Bombed Out Building. So we'll have that link there, and that might be a useful cautionary tale, shall we say. The last piece in terms of this category of looking at some of the shifts and why it's important in your leadership at this time, if you want to actually innovate and you want to, succeed in building out a strong business. When I think about the future of leadership, I want to point out that for you to stand out, for you to innovate and to, make your way to the top, position yourself and your business powerfully, you really need to master these things that we're talking about today. I've had the privilege of assessing hundreds and hundreds of investment pitches and commercialization grant applications over many years now, and been part of being able to make available over $1 billion of capital into small and medium-sized businesses. I've also invested directly myself with my own money into more than 40 different businesses, granted to dozens. So I have the advantage of being very familiar with seeing how business leaders are out there talking about their business and pitching it or presenting it. And one of the things that I wanted to share with you that relates to these components of why it's important to actually know your leadership style and why that thrive cycle that I've shared with you is going to be absolutely critical if you want to innovate and lead well in the current market. And that is that if you can't read the room and tailor your message to your audience, then you are going to find yourself in a position where people kind of just skim over the top and where you really get lost in the noise because there is too much information out there. There's too much going on for people to have to engage with, for them to do the mental gymnastics to work around you if you can't really read the room quickly and effectively and speak directly to your audience. And I can tell you from reading hundreds of applications, pitches, assessments every year that very, very rarely are leaders doing that well. They're too focused on telling their own stories or their own motivations or why they think something's important and not quickly enough getting to the point of explicitly matching up what is important to that stakeholder that they're talking to and how the value that they bring as an organization will address that. So that element related to being able to read the room and tailor your message to the audience, that is relevant for all of us, whether you are pitching to investors, whether you're going for some kind of big commercialization grant from a government perspective, whether you are trying to speak to your market, whatever it might be, there is very often the situations where there's a version of a pitch or a presentation or a proposal that you are needing to do. And so this skill of rapidly reading the room, customizing the message specific to that audience is a really important one in this day and age. I'm going to draw out for you 3 of the shifts that I've observed over the last decade around leadership styles in business. And what I'd love for you to do as I read through these and explain them, I'd like for you to reflect on your own leadership, both personally and then more broadly if your organization has a bigger executive or leadership team, and to really do a bit of a self-assessment on these elements of where do you stand. Have you made these shifts? Are these part of how you lead? So the first of the shifts that have occurred is around an adoption of Agile leadership. And what I mean by this is that connected to the really fast-paced rise of a work environment where you need to be able to be quick, adaptable, and respond really quickly to those changes. This shift to that more agile form of leadership, quite flexible form of leadership, has been one that has become more popular. It is an approach that, as I said, requires you to be flexible, open to change, and be able to respond rapidly to new information and shifts in your business landscape. One of the elements that I want to point out around this shift is that modeling this, so as a leader, being someone who actually embraces that agile type of leadership, what that actually leads to is encouraging innovation and risk taking in your business, which when we think about wanting to get ahead, wanting to bring innovation into your organization, that's a really important thing. That's going to be the result of you modeling that type of leadership. Modern leadership styles often encourage innovation by fostering environments where taking calculated risks is supported. This involves creating safe spaces for employees to experiment and explore new ideas without the fear of failure. One of the pieces that you might want to go back and check if you missed it, a few episodes back in episode 85, I interviewed Dr. Amy Clymer, and that episode and her book would be worth you digging into a little bit more if you want to get some more granular ideas or steps, tools, etc. that you can use. So that episode is called Unlocking Team Creativity, Innovating with Dr. Amy Clymer, and it's episode 85. In the show notes, I'll pop a link to that one, but that could be a useful next step on this particular shift. The second shift is one towards empathy and a more engaged or connected style of leadership. For this piece, what I have definitely seen change, particularly over the last decade, is leaders placing more of an emphasis on empathy, emotional intelligence, those pieces that fit in the category of really some of what I described in the Thrive cycle. So it's that tuning into and genuinely wanting to understand the value stakeholders want. It's about doing that same piece with your own team, right? So it's not barking orders. It's not trying to force people to obey you, but it's this transition to understanding the importance of connecting with your team on a personal level and recognizing that employee well-being is actually crucial to the productivity and success of your business, right? So their engagement, their sense of purpose and connection of their work to the contributions of the greater goals of the business all play out in really important ways that old school leadership styles really didn't value. The other element here that needs to kind of fit under this category is that leaders who are embracing this shift are more attuned to the market, to their customers, and other key stakeholders. There are people who do this in a more one-dimensional way, so it can kind of be, oh, this is my preferred way of operating, or I really love people, I'm a people person, right? So there can be some people where that connection style and the engaged style with people is just their preference. I want to make clear that this second shift that I'm describing is more strategic than that. Genuinely is about caring for and wanting that that connection and engagement, but it's doing it very strategically in terms of it being a leadership style because you see the value in it on both sides. You value those particular stakeholders and you value the outcomes that you know you will get as an organisation when you engage in that way. The last of the shifts that I want to cover is around technology-driven decision-making. Leaders that I'm observing as the most effective in the current market are seeking to make informed decisions. Now, when I highlight this third one as one of the shifts in leadership styles that's occurred, particularly quite massively in the last decade around technology-driven decision-making, I do want to point out that the majority of leaders have access to data that they are not using to inform their decision-making, right? So the presence of data, the availability of information that your team might be collecting or that you might be collecting is not the same thing as making informed or data-driven decisions. The technology component is really important here as well because, again, Leaders that are embracing this shift effectively aren't just spending a bunch of time and money and effort on bringing in new technology, but they're directly connecting it to making sure that any of these things they're implementing are then feeding into and supporting decision making. When you combine these three different trends, they reflect a more dynamic, empathic, and inclusive approach to leadership that aligns much better with the rapid changes in the global business market, emphasizing adaptability, inclusivity, and connection help address the current challenges and harness opportunities for growth and innovation. I want to just tie some of this back to some practical examples, and then I'm going to do a little recap before we wrap up for the end of this session. I've hinted at this already today, but when we think about navigating innovation in leadership styles, and we think about the future of leadership and innovating our way to the top, we have to be honest with ourselves that there is so much noise. There is a competition for attention that is unprecedented, right? That's the market that we're operating in. People are being bombarded. And so to stand out, you need to know three key things with the way I look at it. You need to have foundations, really solid foundations at your disposal, and I'll explain that in a moment. You need to be able to tailor on the fly. So this goes back to the piece I said to you before of being able to read the room and really speak specifically to your audience. And you need to be able to differentiate yourself in the market. Actually, I'm going to throw in a fourth one. Then the fourth one is that you have to obsess over delivering results, right? So they're the four pieces that if we take this conversation today and we say, okay, let's make it really practical, let's give some specifics and examples, that's where I want you to be focused now to start to help you shift into being able to stand out in amongst all the noise and actually capture the right people's attention. So that first one around foundations, this is going to be achieved if you sit with and develop the elements that make up that Thrive cycle I shared with you. So in that, related to the first component of the Thrive cycle, know the value you bring. Some of the foundations that are going to emerge for you there are going to be around things like your organization's values and vision. When you move into the category of understand the value stakeholders want, which is the second part of the Thrive cycle, some of the tools that you're going to use and the insights you're then going to have are things like really clear language around your value proposition that is in the language of your customer, not your language, and that speaks directly to how they would see the jobs they need done, their pain points, and their gain creators, what it is they're looking for. The third element of the Thrive cycle, which is capture value in return. When you do that work, the foundational element that you'll get clarity on are things like your business model. You will be able to really design a business model now informed by knowing the value you bring, understanding the value stakeholders want, and capturing value in return. And the way that works from a business model perspective is that the foundations you build with your Thrive cycle ensure that you are delivering results that drive revenue, right? So everything's connected. This is a big distinction in the work that we do, where businesses are out there running a million miles an hour, not connecting the dots. Consultants are coming in and charging a fortune for discrete, disconnected pieces of work that don't take the time to understand context and do not explicitly connect into all the other moving pieces you have, right? So this first element that I've said that you need to really have in place of foundations, using the Thrive cycle is going to completely change the game there. The second element of what I've laid out for you as the practical pieces you need to have in place was the ability to tailor on the fly. The way I want you to think about this is that it is critically important that you listen and customize. People in this market, particularly when we're talking more expensive or higher commitment purchases, they really want to feel that something is customized and is directly addressing their either pain point, something that they're wanting to avoid, or that gain element that they're getting something that they desire. And that won't be achieved unless you can demonstrate this piece of tailoring on the fly. So listening to someone, customizing. And the piece that I want to draw out here and connect for you back to the Thrive cycle is that I want to make it clear that when I say tailor on the fly, when I talk about listening and customize, I'm not encouraging you to spend every conversation starting from a blank sheet of paper. So like, oh, what do you want? Yes, we can do that. Let's develop a new offer and a new product. And I'm not suggesting that. When these things, they build on each other, right? Sequence is important. When you've done the work to get those foundations in place that we just talked about, what it means is as you listen and customize to do this piece of tailoring on the fly, you are informed by the fact that you can access those foundations really quickly. So you know the skill set you have and the value that you bring as an organization, so that if you're listening to someone and there's not a good match there, be honest about that. Refer them to someone else. That will make you stand out in their mind far more than pretending you can do something that you don't actually have the skills to do, right? So you don't have to try to be all things to all people. In fact, as I always say, please don't. But tap into those foundations now to allow you to be incredibly responsive and customize in a way that creates this beautiful synergy between what you are uniquely good at as an organization and what that particular customer is wanting. The other cautionary element that I want to put in here is that as you're doing this piece of tailoring on the fly, as you're listening and customizing, one of the things that I want you to be really clear on from the foundational work you've done is to know what actually is non-negotiable, what has to be in place, which pieces of work or certain types of activities are essential to get the result, because that's your job as the expert or the authority to identify those. It's not the customer's responsibility. And what I mean by that is that what can often happen is there's something that a customer sees as their problem or their need. When you have lived and breathed things and are as much of an expert as you are, you often can see from the outside there's actually other problems going on there. What you want to make sure you take into account in this category is where to hold your ground firmly on saying we're going to have to do this element of the work if you want to get that outcome or that result that you're saying is important to you as the customer. Now, sometimes you're going to have to be creative in that because someone is not going to value it enough to see it as one of the elements they're paying for. And so you might need to get creative in how you weave it in, and you don't talk about it as much or profile it as one of the pieces they're paying for. But you must ensure that even in the tailoring process or the customizing, that you don't lose elements that actually then decrease the chance of them getting a result, because that actually will work against both of you. So the third piece here that you need to really know is around how to differentiate. In this category, it's again those elements of using the work we've done today and talked about you needing to reflect on and build as those stepping stones, if you like, to make it a smoother, easier transition for someone to find out about you and then become a customer. The differentiation is critical because you need to be able to spell out how you solve their problem and how you're different to the alternatives. And I would argue that when we look at this element of innovation, when we look at the future of leadership and how that plays out in building a thriving business, this piece of differentiation is really critical. And you are positioned far more effectively to do that if you have done the two previous things. If you've built out the foundations, so you have your Thrive cycle pieces really clear. If you then have done the work to be able to tailor on the fly, so you're listening and customizing, When it gets to knowing how to differentiate, when it gets to being able to spell out how you'll solve their problem and how you're different to the competition, you now have at your disposal all of this great data and insights to pull in. Don't bombard them with everything, but you're able to now tell them a really tailored, specific to them story of how you can provide that transformation or that particular result that they're after. The fourth piece, the last one here around the practical examples, is to ensure that you obsess over delivering results. Far too often, that is not enough of a priority in the way we lead and the way we run our businesses. What I really want to encourage you to do in this component is to fall in love with your customers more so than with your products and services, right? If you have to lean in one direction, focus in on and obsess over that love of and understanding of the customer, because that Thrive cycle and the work we've done is going to ensure that there is quality there that can deliver results and drive revenue. But when you get those around the wrong way and you're too obsessed with or focused on your own product or service, that's when you fall into that trap that I described of the hundreds and hundreds of pitches that I have to listen to, where someone's actually just talking for 95% of their pitch about a level of detail and obsession with their product or service that is not actually of interest or relevance to the audience, right? So that last one, obsess over delivering results. Fall in love with your customers, not just your product or service. So I want to just briefly recap for you the benefits of the Thrive cycle, because again, in my mind, part of why I designed that framework is because it's super simple, but it gives you that way in to start to investigate these key components that are going to allow you to build a really robust business. So the few things I want to point out related to the Thrive cycle: it is going to help you stay relevant. It is going to really help you diversify your funding or revenue streams because of the insights that you're going to get through the process. It will allow you to have your finger on the pulse, which in this rapidly changing market, and when we look at needing to innovate, to differentiate and position ourselves powerfully, that finger on the pulse is critical. And the way that that informs how we do the positioning piece, you can't skip any of those steps and then expect to get the same result. So that's the Thrive cycle. I really encourage you to sit with it. And the last piece I just want to refresh you on, because we've covered a lot today, is to bring your mind back to the central idea I shared at the beginning of Polis, the ancient Greek concept of Polis, a partnership for living well. I would love for you to adopt that idea yourself and to think about it related to your own leadership and your business. Use that concept of Polis to create a win-win, to create a business you can be proud of, to create a business where when you win, it's not at the cost of someone else. It's not because you exploited someone else or manipulated someone else. It's not this zero-sum game, right? We're not trying to build businesses like that. Everything that you've heard today, I'm hoping, is really hammering home this idea that reflection, thoughtful, strategic work as a leader around your own leadership style and your business aren't just nice things to do. They absolutely are what is going to enable you to build a solid business. So as we wrap up today, if you reflect on these ideas and you put them into practice, all of the things that we've covered today, you will innovate and you will find your way to the top, making it through all of the noise and capturing the attention of the critical people that you're here to serve.